Information in this podcast is of general nature only. It does not take into account your personal needs or objectives. Before investing in any product, you need to consider your personal situation, needs and objectives. Always seek professional advice for your particular circumstances and needs prior to investing.
So good morning, everyone. Morning, Lauren, and good morning, Stephen Faichney. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you.
Excellent. So Stephen Faichney is a special guest, and I hate stealing thunder, Stephen. So would you mind introducing yourself and who you are and what you do and where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CEO of Hilltop Caring, based out of Brisbane. We're predominantly a accommodation provider. So we're talking SIL provider. We try as much as possible not to, own property. We do out of necessity own a couple of properties, but I guess overall we prefer to keep that separate. So that's why I guess we engage with agents and SDA providers on a regular basis.
Yeah. Right. So you're a SIL, which is fantastic because, you know, I'm not sure if you've had the chance, Stephen, to watch any of our previous episodes. Lauren and I have really been digging around in this SIL SDA provider relationship arena for a couple of months. And I'm pretty passionate about getting people into the most appropriate accommodation that they can. And for a lot of people out there, and again, at any point, I'm happy to be checked. If I say something that's like just not right, you can hang on to that, that's not quite it. But I keep hearing and discussions with the people that come through the door at Disability Housing Solutions are, there's a lot of people in the SIL world who either have an SDA in their plan and no SDA home, or they might qualify for an SDA. And we're exploring this thing, what we're calling the rental step-down model, where you might have a single SDA participant who's in a really happy SIL home, but under the Appendix H provisions, you can move the whole SIL home into a purpose-built SDA home. So things like that we're kind of exploring. And how to engage with SILs to have that kind of collaborative relationship. Now, I know that you and Lauren go way back to a development that we've called the Smith Collective years ago. And you've been providing services for Disability Housing Solutions tenants for a long, long time. And that's part of the reason. So Lauren sort of connected all the dots today to have this happen, which I'm really grateful for. So look, there's a bit there. What are your thoughts on that kind of interaction between SILs and SDAs?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think it's again, like you said, it's about the relationships. So I think it's important for SIL providers to have strong relationships with the SDA providers, and the SDA providers to actually do their best to understand the SIL provider and what the business means to them, whether it's how SIL providers look at vacancies, what the demand is. Because for many years, I've also worked with developers and also talked to SDA providers. You know, the SDA market's not going to be there forever in its current form. So, you know, the developers that a lot of SDA providers work with should start looking at, well, how can we also target the SIL model? You know, just purpose-built, maybe IL-style homes. And obviously we're seeing some of those things mentioned in the reviews that are coming out of government. Yeah. But, you know, we see towns even here in Queensland, you know, we're seeing towns that are oversupplied with SDA at this point in time. It's not to say that the participants won't come eventually, but right now it is an oversupply in some places.
Definitely.
So, you know, it's making sure that, I guess, developers, sales agents, SDA providers are really honest with investors and say, hey, this could be a long-term investment, but are you able to service this loan if you were to put this on the open market for the first 2 years? And when I say open market, it might be to a SIL provider at some form of market rates or something like that. And at least have something in that SIL house, because as we know, we're in a rental crisis. It's
Mm.
hard for SIL providers to get rental properties for pure SIL. So
And
there's,
that's something
yeah.
that's something that we've been unpacking. Is we know there's a rental crisis, and we know that SIL providers still need accommodation and are really out there battling mums and dads and families and whatnot for available properties. Yet there's so many SDAs in some locations sitting there vacant on the market because people don't have SDA funding. But looking creatively at a solution, and I know you've got a really great brain for this, Stephen. We've discussed so many different scenarios that SDA can still be of value to the community and be a good investment for the investor so that they can continue to produce good housing. And it's looking at those creative models where, you know, you might have a SIL provider come in initially, knowing that some of those participants haven't applied for SDA but could be eligible, and looking at, okay, let's put this household together and over a 12-month period assess participants for SDA eligibility, and eventually have that long-term SDA lease on the property, or various other models that might suit. So, you know, we were just touching on before we started recording there, one of the bigger hurdles that we're seeing in the industry, and that you've suggested that you're seeing as well, is that in those areas where there's an undersupply of property, and you know, we started out here on the Gold Coast, so we use that as the example. There's an undersupply of SDA here at the moment, but a high demand. So finding properties is quite difficult. Yet there are some properties where there is one person in there and a SIL provider in place, and unfortunately, another SIL provider with another tenant that needs housing is having difficulty coming in and creating a working relationship with the existing provider. So what solutions have you come up with, or are you trialing in the market at the moment that are helping to overcome that instance? Because that's a problem nationwide.
It is. And I guess one of the things is, one of the initial barriers is for us is SDA providers just understanding what it is we're talking about in those shared models, because ultimately we may not know who the existing SIL provider is in a property. So we're relying on the SDA provider to sell that shared model to the SIL provider that's existing, or connecting us with them to have that conversation. So, but the model we're talking about here is an opportunity for, say, two SIL providers to work together on a 24/7 roster or a 24/7 basis to provide supports to multiple people in a house. And it is absolutely possible to do with a strong relationship between the two SIL providers. And it's a viable option, and it's great for providers. I mean, again, I think it was late last week, I heard of unfortunately, after the fact, I heard of a SIL provider pulling out of an SDA property because they were only able to, I guess, find one tenant for the house.
Yeah, I mean, so right now, I think if there's a lot of SILs watching this, you know, right now, whose head's about to pop, because again, just speaking with a number of them, they don't like to share a house, and that's a fairly traditional kind of attitude with SILs, right? And so, Stephen, you're sort of trailblazing here and saying not only is it workable, it can be really, really great. So, and how do you overcome the challenges of the economics of that business model?
Well, first of all, we're certainly not the first to do this business model, but I think, you know, we've been inspired by it and we see it as a viable option. Ultimately, a SIL provider is paid for supports based on each hour of support they provide. So basically, say, if you don't include a sleepover shift in a house, that sort of nighttime, a SIL provider is basically providing 16 hours of support in a house. So generally speaking, you're only splitting that. So you're sharing that with another SIL provider on an equal basis. And that's depending on the needs of the participants in that house. You work that out before you go into it with the other SIL provider. So from a financial perspective, it is viable. It's not an issue. Yes, yes, there are different complexities if it was a pure SIL house, because you're then dealing with rents and things like that. But in an SDA property, a SIL provider is not involved in the rent process. It is purely the provision of support. So before going in there, the two SIL providers sit down and they work out, for example, they come to an agreement on, a lead SIL provider only for the purpose of potentially policies and procedures and processes. They negotiate all those things up front. And once there's an agreement, then you just get underway.
Who does what hours? Yeah. I really like that you've made that really clear in my head. And I mean, we've been talking about this for ages. It's sort of information I know, but conceptually explaining it in the fact that, you're getting paid by the hour for supports delivered. In a SIL house, you're also paying rent, utilities, sometimes a board payment out of the person's pocket, sometimes a contribution to food. So that would be far more complex to unpack and divide. But for an SDA model where the participants are responsible for their own utilities, and food and household expenses are out of their pocket, and the rent is taken care of with the SDA component, it really does simplify the model, and I would assume that it actually makes it much easier to deliver.
It actually does, and it's I guess the key to the success is the two SIL providers sort of negotiating or deciding on all those governance, I guess, items prior to moving in. So one SIL provider might be responsible for managing groceries and things like that, and another SIL provider might be responsible for maintenance and the relationship with the main relationship with the SDA provider. I mean, it's an endless list, but it's easy because as you work through it together, you have it set in stone. And the best models where this works is when the two SIL providers have a simple, I guess, process of and this is just a general example. One SIL provider might provide supports every day from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m. and the other SIL provider from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. or any combination of those. They make it really simple, but there's a lot of bonuses. You've got, in an emergency, you've got two sets of staff, two organizations working on filling vacancies, so it just
the SDA provider.
With the SDA provider. So, and you know what? It's a great model too for smaller organizations or smaller SIL providers who want to provide SIL but don't have a lot of experience and want to learn from a more experienced SIL provider.
And we do find often the smaller SIL providers appreciate that support and that flexibility in what's delivered, but are also sometimes open to more creative solutions. So, I think that they are good partners to approach with this model, for sure.
Ultimately, it's about providing, I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I've always believed in being flexible, being flexible. I've never, if I'm a SIL provider, I strongly encourage participants to have a different community access provider. I like to have the more people to me in the mix, the better, because it's the better outcome for the participants, and quality of service to me is the number one thing, the most important thing, quality. Because if you can provide a quality service, the rest flows. So,
no, I agree. Well, you've always had a very open approach to these conversations, and I really appreciate that, because for us, that's the kind of thing that brings solutions to the market where a lot of other providers are stuck, and are just not creatively looking at the situation, going, what can we do here? Instead of monopolizing a household, and blocking opportunities for and housing solutions for others to come in. Like, let's open up those doors and have the conversation and look at this really practically. That has a lot of benefits for the participant safeguarding and oversight, like you said, by a larger group of stakeholders. And as long as everybody's there for the right reasons to provide those solutions and work together, then it can just provide so many more opportunities for housing and support in the industry that I think at the moment are just aren't being explored because of that barricade of, no, this is my household, my providership. There's, anyone coming in has to, have services delivered by us and us only. So it's really great that you're coming up with those solutions and getting them out there in the market. It'll make a big difference.
Stephen,
I guess,
sorry, you go, Stephen. Sorry, mate.
I was just going to say the other area that this model works really well in is, and forgive the terminology, is the concierge model.
Yeah.
So having two providers providing that 24/7 concierge in an apartment building actually builds more capacity into managing all those apartments. Because I guess I find on average, most of the apartment buildings with concierge average somewhere between 9 and 12 apartments.
Yeah.
So, having at least in the concierge or the 24/7 on call pool, having two providers involved in that makes things run much more smoothly and brings a lot more creativity to it, because particularly in those environments, you've got, say, 9 apartments that you're trying to create, I guess, a community from. Having an extra provider in the mix, and don't get me wrong, you've got to really build trust with each other as providers,
Sure.
but you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's just connecting with providers that are happy to look at that model.
Yeah.
And be open. Yeah.
It's look, there's a lot there that I'd really like to get into, right? So, and what I'm getting from this is this idea seems to be more well received in your experience, Stephen, by smaller providers. Is that right?
Smaller providers, but not only smaller providers, but younger providers. So what I mean by that is I find that providers that may have 5, maybe 10 years of experience as a provider,
right,
they are definitely the preferred.
That's interesting. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, because they would have only come around since SDA was a thing, right?
Yeah.
And a bit like you pointed to a moment ago, that there's some SDA providers out there that don't understand SIL well. And I think the opposite's true. There's a lot of SILs that just don't get SDA, and they've been around a long time. So the younger ones, they've grown up in an industry where this is a thing, and they haven't had to relearn it. Or if that's got something to do with it, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, I guess it's also not just about the, maybe it's also once a provider becomes too big, maybe it's easier for them just to, maybe it's too much work to get into this new model. But look, that's just I haven't experienced a large provider open to that. But in saying that, it may be there, and there might be some large providers out there who are.
I think there's some large providers out there looking to. I mean, we've just started working with a really large community housing provider who has a small portfolio of SDA, and we're exploring taking over the management of their SDA because we're experts in disability accommodation, and it gives them a separation of services, which is a really different business model for us. It's in our wheelhouse, and it's providing a separation, which is the intention of the scheme, but it's not something we would have thought of before people are looking at how can we do things differently. Because I think there is a big push, particularly right now, about how can we do things a bit smarter. Before we started, I spoke about that Lauren and I have been talking with SILs, and a lot of the feedback we've been getting is how there's not a lot of profit right now as a SIL. It's really hard to make a profit to have company security and longevity to keep taking care of people. And a big part of that risk seems to be in accommodation. If you've got vacancies, you've got rising rents, you can't get access to a house, there seems to be a lot of risk in the accommodation for a SIL. And if you align smarter with SDAs, again, I'm happy to say, David, you're wrong, but I have this view that you can eliminate a whole area of risk as a SIL would be accommodation, and you can eliminate that because you're no longer paying rent, paying bills, paying maintenance and repairs, but you still get to provide services, which is the business really that you're in.
Yeah, and I agree. I think supply has been probably the biggest issue, which comes and goes. It goes through phases, but also, I mean, being involved in SDA from early on in that process. I mean, obviously early on we had the challenges of investors being lied to about the returns.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I still see it now. I still see investors who think they can, totally fill a house and with SDA people and get $200,000 and it's all great. But
you don't want to get me started on that. I will go.
Yeah.
That's a rabbit hole for another day.
We've got episodes and hours of content related to this stuff. It's nuts out there.
But the best SDA providers, and because of the work they've done with their investors or their owners, is where I've got an SDA property available with a flexible arrangement. So the best model for me, to be honest, is a 3-bedroom house. And I say 3-bedroom as in 3-participant bedroom house, or a villa complex, that's fine as well. But if I know that an investor is happy with 1 or 2 SDA participants, and then I can use the 3rd available bedroom flexibly, whether that's MTA or whatever it is, or even just a standard rent, on an as-needs basis, and they're just happy with the 1 or 2 participants, then that's the perfect arrangement, because it, again, brings flexibility back in for us as SIL providers, because ultimately, wherever someone lives is going to come down to location, number one, of where a participant would want to live. So we're never always going to have the right place at the right time in the right location. So the more flexibility that is out there, the better. I mean,
I think the word you're speaking to around is compromise. And that's true of any able-bodied person as well as a person with a disability. There's no one lives in the perfect house in the perfect spot, right? There's a compromise no matter what you do. I've been thinking about this a little bit, and that I think it's right and noble and correct to try and provide the best possible accommodation in the best spot for people with disabilities in these homes. I do. And we're not always going to tick all the boxes. We're just not.
No.
And so the compromise piece is really important. And I love what you're saying about layering in flexibility and setting expectations with investors and owners. It's a really important point, because we can still use these Appendix H provisions to provide a really great return for an investor, but you get these spruikers who go out there and say you're going to make 20% on your house, and they lie to investors, and they come and talk to people like us, and they say things like, hey, my house finishes in 4 weeks' time, can I please have 3 high physical support tenants by the end of next month? Is that okay, right? And then there's a whole conversation about resetting expectations and dealing with broken hearts and tears and losing the family home. So I love the flexibility layering, Stephen, about how, and it's such a valuable point about if there's 1 or 2 SDA participants, and then there's a flexibility across the rest of the house, that you can still provide a really good social outcome and a really great return as an investor.
I think it is, considering there's also, that's great for SDA, and then you've got the pure SIL homes. We're seeing some providers are finding a lot of success with what investors call micro units. Do you understand that term? Which is those houses that have like 5 self-contained units or whatever. But I guess the issue is they are a great, they're filling a void at the moment, but they're not the ideal. And they've become, I know in Brisbane, they've become almost too expensive now. So
Yeah.
we think about rents, but these are tiny micro units. They're lovely, that are renting for $450 a week in many
Wow.
locations each.
Yeah.
So
They're
great for,
essentially a small studio apartment, essentially.
but they are. The idea and the concept is great. It just needs to be fleshed out by a developer who might have some land just on the outskirts of town, where they could tailor this type of model, but at a better cost for disability. And I know that's possible because talking to the developers who have originally built these, they are like, there's huge amounts of money they can save on the build through the quality of the finishes that they're using. So at the moment, they're using very expensive finishes, very expensive tiles, you know, things like that. So there is a way to make that a viable option as well. And you know, there's another SDA provider, as we all know, that has access to a lot of the old NRAS property. But so in some cases, that's great SIL property.